Today we are going to be estimating each sum or difference to the nearest whole or half by rounding. We need to explain our estimate using words or a number line. If we look at A, we have 2 and 1/12 plus 1 and 7/8. If you were to think of 2 and 1/12 on the number line, if you had 2 to 3 and you broke it down into 12ths, 2 and 1/12 would be really close to the number 2. So we would round 2 and 1/12 down to 2. If we had 1 and 7/8, so if we started at 1 and went to 2 and broke it down into eighths, 1 and 7/8 would be really close to 2. So we would round up to 2. So for rounding, we would do 2 plus 2 equals 4. Now that you're more familiar with fractions, you may be able to round just by using your benchmark. So if you look at 1 and 11/12, you know if you visualize that number line in your head that 11/12 is going to be really close to the right-hand side where the whole number 2 is. So we know we're going to round 1 and 11/12 up to 2. And then we know that 5 and 3/4 will be rounded up to 6. So 2 plus 6 equals 8. Now we will subtract 8 and 7/8 minus 2 and 1/9 by estimating. So we know that 8 and 7/8 is very close to 9, and 2 and 1/9 is very close to 2. So we would round to 9 minus 2 equals 7. So our difference is going to be about 7. Try to estimate 6 minus 1/8 minus 2 and 1/12 on your own now. Pause the video and push play to check your work. You should have rounded 6 and 1/8 to 6 and 2 and 1/12 to 2 to get 6 minus 2 equals 4. Now we will estimate the sum of 3 and 3/8 plus 5 and 1/9. If you remember from the directions, it said that you would estimate the sum or difference to the nearest whole or half by rounding. So if we look at 3 and 3/8, we can start with 3 and go over to 4 on our number line, and then we will break the number line into eighths. Now, let's start by marking our halfway point. We know that 4/8 is going to be 3 1/2, right between 3 and 4. So if we were to mark 3 and 3/8, you can see that it's closer to 3 1/2 than it is to 3. So we would round 3 and 3/8 to 3 and 1/2. And then 5 and 1/9 would round down to 5. So we would add 3 and 1/2 plus 5 to get 8 and 1/2 as our estimate. We will be skipping the second part of lesson 29. Please move on to lesson 30 on page 61. Now we're going to take a step past estimating, and we're actually going to add a mixed number and a fraction. So you can see that we're going to be working with common denominators as we start this process. And so what you're going to want to focus on is like units. So you can see that we have a whole number of 3, and then we have 2 fractions. So we want to add together our fractions when we add these numbers together. So if we pull out 1/4 plus 1/4, we get 2/4. So we can't forget about our whole number from before. We pull that into our answer. We get 3 and 2/4, which we know we can simplify to 3 and 1/2. Now we are going to add 7 and 3/4 plus 1/4. Once again, we want to pull out our like units, our fractions, and add those together. So we have 3/4 plus 1/4. We know when we're adding fractions, our denominator stays the same, and we add our numerators. So in this case, we got 4/4. We know that anytime the numerator and the denominator are the same, that fraction is equal to 1. So now we need to go back to our 7 and add 1. So we get 7 plus 1 equals 8. Now we are adding 3/8 plus 5 2/8. So once again, we will pull out our fractions and add them together. Our denominator stays the same, and we add our numerators. 3 plus 2 equals 5. Then we go back to our whole number, and we add them. So we get 5 plus 5/8, which is 5 5/8. Now we will be adding 1/8 plus 6 7/8. We're going to pull out our fractions and add them together. Our denominator stays the same, and we add our numerator to get 8/8, which we know is equal to 1 whole. Now we go back to our whole number, and we add that to 8/8 or 1. So 6 plus 1 equals 7. The next problems are asking you to figure out what you would need to add to a mixed number to equal a certain whole number. So for A, we have 4 7/8 plus what number would equal 5? So we know that we have 4 7/8, which is very close to 5, but not quite there. So what would we need to add to 4 7/8 to get 5? Well, if we just looked at 4, what do you need to add to 4 to get 5? Just 1. So now we have to bring in our 7/8. 7/8 plus what equals the whole number 1? Well, we would just need one more eighth. 7/8 plus 1/8 would equal 8/8 or 1. So we need to add 1/8 to 4 7/8 to equal 5. Try B on your own. What number would you have to add to 7 2/5 to equal 8? Pause the video and push play to check your answer. You should have answered 3/5. You would have to add 3/5 to 2/5 to equal 1 whole to add to your whole number 7. C is the exact same concept, it's just written in a different order. Instead of saying 2 1/6 plus what number equals 3, it says 3 equals 2 1/6 plus what number. So we know we have to go from 2 to 3, and so we look at our 1/6 and we have to figure out what do we have to add to 1/6 to equal 1 whole. Well, we know we want to get to 6/6, and we already have 1, so we need 5 more 6 to equal 1 whole. Pause the video now and try this one on your own. 12 equals 11 1/12 plus what number? Push play when you are finished to check your answer. You should have got 11/12 for your answer. To add fractional units, sometimes we complete a unit of 1. We look for fractions that have a sum of 1. So if we were adding 2 3/4 plus 2/4, we would want to break apart this 2/4 using a number bond into 1/4. Then you can see that if we took one of those 1/4 and added it to 3/4, we could create a whole unit. So 3/4 plus 1/4 equals 4/4 or 1 whole. So we can take 2 plus our 1 whole to get 3, and then we still have our 1/4 left over that we broke apart. So our final answer would be 3 1/4. Let's practice that again. So if we're taking 3 3/5 plus 3/5, we know that we would need 2 more fifths to equal 1 whole. So we can break down our 3/5 into 2/5 and 1/5 and send this 2/5 over here to make 1 whole. So now we have 3 plus 1 plus our 1/5 that's left over. So we get 4 1/5 as our final answer. Another strategy for adding numbers together is you could just add and then decompose the fraction. So if we just took 4 2/3 plus 2/3, we would pull out our fractional units and add them together. So when we take 2/3 plus 2/3, we get 4/3, which is an improper fraction. So we need to convert 4/3 into a mixed number. So we would break it down to 3/3 and 1/3. So we know that that 3/3 would be 1 whole, and then we would have 1/3 left over. So now we have 4/3 plus 3/3 plus 1/3, which would equal 5 1/3. Three 3/5 plus 4/5. So we're going to start by breaking down our 4/5 this time. If we're looking at 3/5, we know that we would need 2 more fifths to equal 1 whole. So we're going to break our 4/5 down into 2/5 and 2/5. Now we can send this 2/5 over to make 1 whole. So now we have 3 5/5, or 4, plus our 2/5 that is left over. So our answer is 4 2/5. Think to yourself now, when we're taking 5 4/6 plus 5/6, how many more 6 do we need to add to 4/6 to get 1 whole? We would need 2 more 6, so we can borrow that from our 5/6 by breaking it down. If we pull out the 2 6 that we need to make 1 whole over here, we are left with 3 6. So our 4 6 plus 2 6 now equals 1 whole, and then we're left over with our 3 6. So when we add all of that together, we get 6 3 6, which we know can simplify to 6 1/2. Looking at 7/8 plus 6 4/8, how many more eighths would you need to equal 1 whole if you have 4/8? We would need 4. So we come over to our 7/8 and we pull out 4/8 to make a whole number. Then, since we took 4 away from 7, we know we have 3/8 left. So we already used those over here. So now 6 4/8 plus 6 4/8 equals 7, and then we are left with 3/8. So we get 7 3/8. 7/10 plus 7 9/10. Try this problem on your own by breaking down 7/10. Pause the video and push play to check your work. You should have pulled 1/10 out of 7/10 to create 8 over here. Then you would be left with 8 6/10, which would simplify to 8 3/5. Try 9 7/12 plus 11/12 on your own now. Push pause and then push play to check your work when you are finished. You should have broken down 11/12 into 5/12 and 6/12 to be left with 10 plus 6/12 equals 10 6/12, which simplifies to 10 1/2.